Sasha pressed her hand flat against the hospital window and watched the snow come down over Edmonton like it had somewhere important to be. Behind her, on the bed she had not slept in for 2 nights, was a folder, pale blue. The kind that lawyers use when they want to seem approachable. Inside it, 3 copies of a separation agreement, each one already signed by her husband. His signature was tidy and unhurried, as though he had practiced it. She hadn't touched the folder yet. She wasn't sure she could. 41 years old, and she was standing in a hospital gown at 3 in the morning, deciding whether or not to let go of the only life she had ever built from scratch. 14 months earlier, Sasha Oborn had been the kind of woman people described as quietly impressive. She ran a heritage restoration firm out of a converted warehouse in the Glenora neighborhood. A business she had started with 2 employees and a second mortgage on a condo she no longer owned. By the time she turned 40, she had a team of 11, a reputation that brought clients from as far as Vancouver, and a husband named Derek Paul, who told anyone who would listen that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. She believed him. That was the part that still made her stomach tighten when she thought about it now. She had believed every word. They had met at a Heritage Society gala 8 years ago. He was in commercial real estate. Charming in the way that people from money often are, not showy about it, just comfortable. He had laughed at the right moments and remembered the things she mentioned in passing. 6 months later he proposed on the dock at her parents' lake property near Sylvan Lake, and her mother had cried, and her father had clapped Derek on the shoulder like they were already family. They were, she supposed. For a while, she found out about Kendall Frost at a conference in Banff, of all places, not through a confession, not through a friend. She found out because she had borrowed Derek's laptop to send a file, and his messages were already open on the screen. She read 3 lines before she understood what she was reading, and then she sat very still for a long time, watching the cursor blink. Kendall Frost was 29. She worked at a development firm that had been a client of Derek's for 2 years. In the messages, he called her K. He had been calling her K for 14 months. Sasha closed the laptop and finished her conference panel without telling anyone what she had seen. She answered questions about load-bearing walls in 19th century Albertan farmhouses. She smiled at people who handed her business cards, and she drove back to Edmonton the next morning in near silence, with the kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from something having gone very cold inside you. She told him that night. She said very quietly, "I know about Kendall." He didn't deny it. That surprised her. He sat down at the kitchen island and put his face in his hands. And when he looked up, he said he was sorry. That it had gotten out of control, that he hadn't meant for it to go this far. This far, she repeated, as if there were a distance that would have been acceptable. He moved out 3 weeks later. The divorce papers arrived through a lawyer she had never met. Her own lawyer, a woman named Frances Beaulieu, who had the energy of someone who had seen all of this before and found it mildly insulting on behalf of the profession, went through the agreement line by line and told Sasha she could do better. But Sasha was tired. She was tired in a way she couldn't explain to Frances, or to her mother, or to anyone who hadn't spent years quietly suspecting that something was off, and then telling yourself you were imagining things. She just wanted it to be over. What she didn't know yet, what she found out from her doctor 11 days after signing the papers, was that she was 7 weeks pregnant. She had not told Derek, not at first. She sat with it alone for 2 weeks, which she would later understand was both the worst and the only thing she could have done. Her GP referred her to an obstetrician named Dr. Anand, who was matter-of-fact and kind, and who told her at the 6-week ultrasound that what they were looking at appeared to be twins. Sasha stared at the screen for a long moment, she said. 2 strong heartbeats, Dr. Anand confirmed. Do you have someone to call? My. She did not answer that question directly. She called Derek that evening from the parking lot of the medical building, sitting in her car with the engine running because it was February and -22. He picked up on the second ring, which she noted in the part of her brain that was still cataloging everything with the precision of someone who had not yet figured out how to fall apart. He was quiet for a very long time after she told him. Then he said, "Are you sure they're mine?" She ended the call. His lawyer contacted Frances 2 days later with a settlement offer. It was a number that would cover perhaps 8 months of her mortgage. There was a non-disclosure clause buried in paragraph 14. Frances read it out loud with an expression like she had bitten into something. "Don't sign this," Frances said. "I know," Sasha said. "He's trying to?" "I know what he's trying to do, Frances." She didn't sign it, but she also didn't fight it the way Frances wanted her to. She countered with a fair number. Fair, not generous, because she was not interested in punishing anyone, she told herself, though she suspected that was only partly true, and Derek accepted it faster than she expected, which told her Frances had been right. She had left money on the table. She would not understand the full cost of that until later. She moved into a rental in Ritchie, a neighborhood she had always liked, full of old houses with good bones, and people who kept small vegetable gardens in their backyards. The house was a main-floor suite of a 1940s bungalow. It had good light in the morning, and a landlord named Mr. Kosyuk, who plowed the walk without being asked. She kept working. She had to. Her business could not carry her, and 2 employees on maternity leave at the same time, and she was not going to let it. She took meetings by phone when she couldn't drive to site. She reviewed drawings at her kitchen table at 11 at night with her feet up because her ankles had started to swell in May. Derek, she learned through a mutual acquaintance, who still felt it necessary to update her on such things, had moved Kendall into the condo in Windermere that Sasha had helped him choose the kitchen tile for. They were, apparently, very happy. She stopped reading those updates after that. In June, 6 weeks before her due date, she was at the grocery store on 99th Street when she dropped a bag of brown rice on the floor and couldn't bend down to pick it up. She stood there looking at it for a moment, large and tired, and not quite sure why this particular moment was the one that was going to break her composure in the bulk foods aisle. A hand appeared beside her and picked up the bag. She looked up. The man holding her rice was perhaps mid-40s, dark-haired, wearing a jacket that had seen better winters. He held it out to her without making a thing of it. "Thank you," she said. "No trouble," he said. And then, because she was still standing there with her cart and her expression, "Are you all right?" Nobody had asked her that in weeks. Not really. Her mother asked how she was feeling, which was different. Her friends texted. Her colleagues were careful. But nobody had looked at her directly and asked, "Are you all right?" in a way that seemed to mean it. "I don't think so," she said, surprising herself. He didn't try to fix it. He just nodded. "Fair enough," he said. His name was Thomas Breck. He was a structural engineer who worked for a firm that consulted on heritage restorations. He had, it turned out, reviewed the engineering on a church in St. Albert that her firm had restored 2 years ago. They talked in the cereal aisle for 11 minutes. She counted, later, because it struck her as strange that you could meet someone important on a Wednesday afternoon while buying groceries and not know it at the time. He gave her his card. She put it in her bag and forgot about it. She went into labor at 38 weeks on a Tuesday morning in late July. Her sister drove her to the Royal Alexandra. The girls arrived 4 hours apart, small and loud and determined from the very first breath, and Sasha held them both and thought, for the first time in months, that she might be going to be okay. She named them Willa and Fern. Derek's lawyer sent a letter 6 weeks after the birth requesting a paternity test. Frances handled it. Sasha did not read the correspondence. She was not sleeping more than 3 hours at a stretch, and she had a deadline on a restoration project in Strathcona, and she had 2 infants who had not yet synchronized their schedules in any way that resembled mercy. The test came back what everyone already knew it would come back. Derek was the biological father. He then filed for shared custody. Sasha sat in Frances's office when this was delivered and felt something very specific. Not heartbreak, not rage, but a kind of cold clarity. He had not once asked to see them. He had asked, "Are you sure they're mine?" and sent a settlement offer with an NDA clause. He had moved a 29-year-old into the condo that still had the light fixtures Sasha had picked out. And now, when the situation had resolved itself into something legible and documented, he wanted to be their father. "He doesn't get to do this," she said. "No," Frances said, "he doesn't. But we have to prove it." She found Thomas Breck's card 3 weeks later. At the bottom of the bag she had taken to the hospital. She almost threw it away. Instead, she turned it over in her hands for a moment and then set it on the counter. She called him the next day, technically for professional reasons. Her firm was bidding on a restoration project in Vegreville, and she needed an engineering consultation. That part was real. She told herself that was the only reason. He remembered her. He said immediately, the woman from the cereal aisle. How did it go? She told him she'd had twins. There was a small silence on his end, and then he said, "Congratulations, that's a lot." "It is," she said. "Yes." They had coffee a week later. It lasted 2 hours. He asked about the twins not in the way people do when they feel they should, but as though he was genuinely curious. What they looked like, whether they were different from each other, what their names were. He said Willa and Fern and nodded slowly, like he was placing them somewhere. He had been divorced himself 5 years ago. He had a son, Kieran, who was 12 and spent half his weeks with Thomas's ex-wife in Sherwood Park. He talked about Kieran the way good fathers do, specifically without needing to perform it. She didn't mean for it to become anything. She wasn't looking for anything. She had 2 infants and a business and a custody battle that was going to take whatever energy she had left. But Thomas showed up without making a production of it. He brought food sometimes. He sat in her kitchen while she was on a work call and kept an eye on whichever baby was awake. He didn't ask for anything back. "Why are you helping me?" she asked him once, when it was late and the girls were finally asleep and she was too tired to be polite. He thought about it for a moment. "Because you need it," he said, "and because I want to. Both of those things can be true." She looked at him for a long moment and decided to let herself believe it. The custody hearing was scheduled for February, a full 7 months after the girls were born. In those 7 months, Derek had seen his daughters twice. The first time he arrived 45 minutes late to a supervised visit arranged by the social worker and spent most of it on his phone. The second time, he canceled and rescheduled 3 times before it happened. Both visits were documented. Francis had the social worker's notes. Kendall, Sasha heard, through the inevitable grapevine of mutual professional acquaintances, had found out about the pregnancy and had not reacted well. She had moved back to Calgary in October. Whether Derek followed was a matter of some interest to the people who felt the need to keep Sasha informed. But she had stopped caring about any of that. What she cared about was the hearing. She sat in the waiting area of the Court of Queen's bench on a Wednesday morning in February, with Francis on one side and her sister on the other. Thomas had offered to come. She had told him to stay with the girls who were with her mother, because she could not do this and also worry about logistics. Derek arrived with his lawyer and a woman Sasha didn't recognize, who turned out to be a character witness. He was wearing a suit she hadn't seen before. He nodded at her across the room like they were colleagues at a function. The hearing took most of the day. Francis was, to use a word Sasha would always associate with that morning, ferocious. She presented the visitation record. She submitted the social worker's notes. She submitted the original settlement offer with the NDA clause and framed it, accurately, as an attempt to purchase the mother's silence about the circumstances of the divorce, which those circumstances being an ongoing affair that the respondent was conducting while the marriage was active and the petitioner was unaware. Derek's lawyer objected to the characterization. The judge looked at the document and said she did not find the characterization unreasonable. The ruling came at 4:15 in the afternoon. Primary residence with the mother. Derek was given supervised access, with the option to petition for unsupervised access after 6 months of consistent engagement, which, as Frances quietly noted while gathering her papers, would require him to actually show up. Sasha sat very still and breathed. "That's it?" her sister whispered. "That's it," Frances said. She didn't cry until she was in the car. Not from sadness, from something harder to name. Relief, maybe, and exhaustion, and the particular grief had to fight for something that should not have required fighting for. Thomas called as she was driving home. She pulled into a parking lot off Jasper Avenue and told him what happened. He listened all the way through. "You did it," he said. "Francis did it. You hired Francis," he said. "You showed up. You didn't fold." She thought about the hospital window, the blue folder, the snow. "No," she said, "I didn't." Spring came the way it always does in Edmonton, reluctantly at first, then all at once. The girls turned 1 in July. Thomas made a small cake that Willa destroyed with her full hand and Fern regarded with deep suspicion, and Sasha's mother took 40 photographs and didn't once cry, which once was a record. Her firm won the Vegreville project and 3 others that year that she hadn't expected. A profile in Alberta Venture described her as one of the province's leading voices in heritage preservation. She read it at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning with Fern on her hip, and she thought, "This is what I built. This was always mine." Derek exercised his supervised access 4 times in the first 6 months. Not 6. Not the full number. Frances noted it. Sasha noted it. The girls did not yet understand what they were noticing, but they would. One evening in September, when the girls were finally in bed and the house was quiet in that particular way it gets when children are asleep, Thomas sat across from her at the table with his coffee and said, "I want to ask you something." She waited. "I want to be here," he said. "Not as, I don't want to be a provisional thing. I want to be in your life properly, if that's something you want." She looked at him for a long moment, at the jacket that had seen better winters, at the man who had picked up a bag of rice in the bulk foods aisle and not made a production of it. "It's something I want," she said. Derek filed a motion to modify the custody arrangement that October. His lawyer argued that his circumstances had changed, that he was now in a more stable situation. He had reconciled with Kendall, it appeared, or found someone new. The details were blurry, and that he deserved a reassessment. Frances called Sasha with the news. Sasha was sitting in her car outside a restoration site in the river valley eating a sandwich. Because she had not had time for lunch until 3:30, she ate the rest of the sandwich before she responded. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" "We go back in," Frances said. "And we do it again. Then we do it again." The second hearing was shorter than the first. The judge reviewed the access record, the absences, the late arrivals, the single no-show on Fern's first birthday that was documented, and which Sasha had not sought to weaponize, but which was simply true. She reviewed the social worker's updated assessment. She reviewed the letter that Thomas had submitted as the primary-secondary caregiver in the children's household, describing their routine, their development, the names of their friends, the books they liked. The motion was denied. Sasha walked out into the October afternoon with the light going amber over the North Saskatchewan and stood on the courthouse steps for a moment before she put her coat on. She thought about the woman she had been in that hospital room, tired and cold and not yet sure she could lift the pen. She thought about what she had assumed would be the end of something. The folder, the signatures, the clean administrative finish of a life coming apart. She had not understood then that an ending is only an ending if you decide to stop there. She put on her coat. She walked to her car. She drove home to her daughters and the man who had never once asked her to be anything other than exactly who she already was. Willow was asleep in the entryway armchair, which she was too old for and still climbed into anyway. Fern was at the kitchen table with Thomas, the two of them very serious over what appeared to be a coloring book about Canadian wildlife. "Mama," Fern said without looking up, "Thomas says this is a loon." "It is a loon," Sasha said. "It doesn't look like the one at the lake. They almost never do." She set her bag down and kissed the top of Fern's head and then Thomas's shoulder, and he reached up and held her hand for a moment without a word. Outside, the river was still moving. The city was still full of old houses with good bones. And Sasha Oborn, who had once stood at a hospital window, deciding whether she had anything left, was, at last, exactly where she had always been trying to get.